Good morning and welcome to the Candidates Forum of the Dulles Regional Chamber of Commerce. I'm Danny Vargas, former chairman of the Dulles Regional Chamber, and we want to welcome you to this forum, and we want to welcome our candidate who is here with us today. We have Delegate Jim Lemunian with us today from House District number 67. A round of applause for Delegate Lemunian.
Thank you.
Delegate Lemunian, this is your opportunity to give us a 2-minute opening remarks.
Well, Danny, thank you. I want to thank the Chamber for organizing the event, Cox for hosting us, and for you moderating. Just a little bit about the 67th District. If you're not familiar with it, it extends from Oakton down Route 50 through Chantilly, includes Greenbrier, and then out across the Loudoun County line, and includes part of South Riding. You know, I've been out knocking on doors again this year since early summer, and one of the things I hear most often from people when I go door to door can be summed up with the phrase, "What a difference 100 miles makes." The 100 miles being the distance and the difference between Washington and Richmond. In Washington, we have a government that can't pass a budget that is at the same time awash in red ink. We have a national debt that's moving through 14 on to $15 trillion. We have a gridlock and inability to solve the tough questions that face our country, and too often too many people who are interested in winning the argument as opposed to solving the problem. In Richmond, we have a balanced budget. We did that without raising taxes. We had to say no to a lot of people in the process. That's part of what leadership and responsibility is all about. The state still has a AAA bond rating. Even in balancing the budget and making the tough choices, we were able to set aside $4 billion of new money for transportation. And it's a place where Republicans and Democrats can actually get along most of the time. In my first term, I was privileged to have 14 bills pass the House, mostly related to transportation and education issues. Those have been my themes. Every one of those bills passed with Republican and Democratic support. 7 made it to the governor's desk for his signature. So look forward to getting into some of the issues in more detail, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Delegate. Your opponent is not with us this morning. Why don't you take a couple of minutes to describe the differences between you and your opponent in ways that might matter to this audience and the folks watching us on television?
Well, it'd be presumptuous of me to speak for him or anyone else, but maybe just tell you a little bit about my approach in the first term and what I would see going forward. I try to be a legislator who is someone who is about ideas. On transportation, I introduced a bill that passed the House that would require every major transportation project in Northern Virginia to be objectively rated based on what it will do to reduce congestion. That bill passed the House, unfortunately not the Senate, but that would certainly be my top priority if I'm returned for the 2011 session. On education, I introduced a bill along with some others to allow local school boards to have more flexibility in starting school before Labor Day. You know, we spend almost $50 million a day in Virginia keeping schools open. Our mandatory testing requirements are usually finished in late May or early June, and so kids are going to school for 2 or 3 weeks. Teachers try their hardest to allow them to learn, but it's certainly a different environment then than it is at the beginning of the school year. We need to give local school boards that flexibility. And lastly, an idea that I didn't think was particularly novel, but it turned out to be, is getting members of the House and Senate to put their voting records on the internet so everyone could see that. I was the first member of the House or Senate to put my entire floor voting record on my website. It's there for all to see. And I was pleased that a resolution I introduced on a bipartisan basis to require that of all House members starting in the 2012 session passed and will take effect then.
Thank you, Delegate. During your opening remarks, you talked about Virginia being able to balance its budget, and we talked about debt a little bit. As we know, families and businesses all too often here in Northern Virginia continue to struggle to make sure that they're able to make ends meet, and in many cases they're going from paycheck to paycheck. What are you going to do in the House of Delegates to make sure that our taxes remain low, that our families and our businesses are able to stay competitive and thriving into the future?
Well, a couple things. There are, as you say, you're exactly right. There are people who are facing really challenging economic times. It's not just a general thing for our area or our state or our country. It's certainly an individual and and family concern. With that said, we're doing a number of things right already in Virginia that we need to keep doing. We are independently rated as the best state for business. There's been a number of initiatives that have passed on a bipartisan basis, the R&D tax credit, telework tax credit, the money for transportation so people can get to work easier. But one of the things that I'd like to suggest along these ideas of, along the idea of new ideas is a revisit of our state's tax code, both individual and corporate. I think it's time that we do that. We haven't really taken a look at that in 40 years. And two provisions in particular, although there are a great many that would need examination, are the B-poll tax and the equipment and machinery tax. Now, these are taxes that are important to local governments, and we need to make sure that they have the funds that they need to do their job. But in my view, they are job killers. The companies that I started in Northern Virginia and ran and continue to operate pay the B-poll tax, whether they're profitable or not. You pay the equipment and machinery tax even if you're a pre-revenue startup. I had to do that 10 years ago when I was starting a semiconductor business. That's a job killer. I mean, I remember writing those checks for $20,000 or $30,000 instead of maybe hiring someone who might be able to move the company forward. So those would be priorities for me in the 2012 session.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask you a political question now. You are a Republican member of the House of Delegates, and you are speaking to a business audience.
Correct.
Correct? And however, as a Republican, I want to get your thoughts on the role of social issues in competitive races for the State House and how they compare to business and economic issues.
I'm not sure I understand your question. It's kind of general.
As a Republican?
Be specific.
As a Republican, you are speaking to a business audience.
Right.
You are also going to be asked in some other forums about your stance on social issues.
Sure.
Where do the two fit in your mind in terms of the races that are being fought here in Northern Virginia for elected office?
Yeah.
Practical, pragmatic, economic business issues versus social issues.
Again, I can just go back to my experience in knocking on doors. It's kind of the best way to know what's on people's minds. Social issues, frankly, rarely come up. There's certainly issues related to firearms, abortion, sexual orientation, but probably 95% of the people I talk to going door to door ask the questions that you've already asked, like, what about jobs and the economy? What are we going to do to get the roads going? People say, I moved to Northern Virginia because of the great schools. It's one of the reasons my wife and I decided to stay here 28 years ago. That's what people want to talk about, and that's the focus of the initiatives that I've put forward and would expect to put forward next year.
Well, I appreciate it. And I think we're at the time now where we can look for your closing remarks. So, Delegate Lemunyan, 2 minutes for closing remarks.
Well, really just to summarize some of the points that I've made. When I ran 2 years ago, I told people that I was about transportation, education, and open government, more transparency, more accountability, getting more for less, just like families in Virginia need to be able to do more with less in a challenging economic period. I think my record shows that I've lived up to those priorities. They would continue to be my priorities in the 2012 session. In addition to that bill that I mentioned related to prioritizing transportation projects, I think in 2012 we need to test the new clout that Northern Virginia will have in the General Assembly with more seats in the House and Senate on issues like the budget and particularly transportation funding. I think we need to reform the Commonwealth Transportation Board to give us the fair representation that we deserve that we don't have. And again, along the idea of new ideas for transportation, maybe this isn't new, it's just new that we haven't done it before, is to come up with a way to better synchronize development with transportation planning. In Virginia, the development decisions are made usually at the local level, transportation decisions at the state level, and they often don't connect. On education, ensuring that we get our fair share for K through 12 funding, the local composite index needs to be protected, and making sure that we have more opportunities for our high school graduates to attend our great public universities and colleges in Virginia. If those are the priorities that you share and you vote in the 67th District, I would respectfully ask for your vote on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.